Well, my friends, today I have some really good news for you because today I'm going to show you a brand new mastering EQ plugin that just came out from Pulsar Audio. It's the W495 and this emulates the Neumann W495 mastering EQ. And the best news that I'm bringing today is that this plugin is going to be entirely free for a limited time. Let's check it out. Pulsar Audio, the kind sponsors of this video, just released the W495 Neumann EQ that's going to be free for a limited time. So I suggest that after watching this video, you go and grab it straight away. But before you do, I'm going to show you how it sounds on a master. I'm going to show you how it works. And while we're at it, I'm going to give you 3 mastering EQing tips that you can use if you want to master at home and you want to learn how to approach mastering if you're doing it on your own. To begin with, let's check out the EQ. This is the 495, and like the original unit, it's a very simple design. It has 3 bands, low shelf, high shelf, and a bell in the middle for the mid-range. And of course, with the usual Pulsar Audio style and treatment, we have mid and side processing for each band. We have stepped or continuous controls when it comes to the frequency selection. We have auto gain, we have oversampling. I have it at 8 times oversampling right here. And we also have a graph right here that we can use. If you want to turn this so that it looks a little bit closer to the original unit, you just toggle this. Now, the Neumann 495 is a really musical mastering EQ. It's really smooth, has lots of headroom, but it's a very rare piece. I'll be honest, I tried to get my hands on one of those so that we can compare it, but I couldn't find one in London. And before we move on to the 3 mastering EQ tips, let me show you how this sounds on an unprocessed mix. This has no compression, no EQ. It's one of my singles, but I exported a special version that's also a little bit darker so that we can hear what you can do if your mix is a little bit dull. This is definitely an EQ that's suitable for mastering. Now, why do I say that? When it comes to mastering, there's a little bit of misconception. Some people think that when you're doing mastering, you're doing surgical cuts and you're doing lots of drastic EQing. And that's not the case. At least that's not supposed to be the case. I see many people that go and watch mastering tutorials from really big mastering engineers and they get really upset because all they do is add a little bit of like 1 dB of low shelf and 1 dB of high shelf on even digital EQs, you know, and they go like, that's all you did? Really? And I get the point. I get the point. It's kind of disappointing if you're looking for super deep mastering tips. But you have to understand that these top mastering engineers, they don't deal with subpar mixes. They get something that's incredible already and they just add the final touches. They add the final sheen. They just make the sound a little bit sweeter. But on the other hand, I totally understand that this is not the reality for many people out there. And having worked in professional studios where I was doing many masters per day, I can tell you that the people that cannot afford these very, very expensive mastering engineers, their mixes are also way more tricky to master. They need more help and you need to do more drastic EQing. So now we're going to jump to the next part of the video where I'm going to give you my mastering EQ tips. So I'm going to start with the same track and I'm going to give you my method that I use if a mix is not great. what do I do and how I approach it? So the first thing that I do is I take care of my filters, and I'm making sure that I can gain as much headroom as possible. And the way I do this is, number one, by filtering, but not only by filtering in the MS field. So I filter the mids and I filter the sides, so the difference between the left and right channel that gives you the stereo perspective separately. And the reason why I do this is because sometimes you have lots of low-end information on the sides that you don't really need, and I filter it out. This way I'm gaining headroom so I can make the master louder, and I'm also making everything a little bit tighter. For something like this, I would use a mastering grade EQ. I would use an EQ that has mid-side capabilities. In this case, I'm going to use the Pulsar 8200. I've done a full video if you're interested to see how it works, but this is emulating the GML 8200. I love this EQ. It's one of my favorite EQs in hardware mode. What I do is I run this EQ and I make sure I turn it into mid-side. The next thing I do is I unlink the mid and side channels. And once I do this, now I'm taking care of my filters. And that's gonna be my next tip. But before we do this, let me show you. The first thing that I'm gonna do is I'm going to solo the sides and see how much I can filter them. So these are the sides. And this is the mid signal. And what I do is I play the whole track and I'm analyzing what's there. What do we need to hear? And of course, later on, I'm going to enhance things, but let's move on. So we have synths, reverbs, delays. You know, that's snare reverb. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to filter this. And I'm going to filter this to the point that I'm not missing anything, but I'm cleaning up the low end. Okay? So let's see. And that's a sub-tip, right? When you EQ for mastering, try and be gentle with your slopes. So, of course, I can go here and go to 48 dB slope on the Pulsar 8200, but this might be a little bit too drastic. I would go for maybe a 12 dB or 6 dB sometimes. So let's play. See? I can go up to 100 Hertz. I'm gonna go to 85 just to be a little bit more conservative. Okay. And now I'm going to filter the mid signal. As I said, make sure that your MS Link button here is off so that these controls don't mirror. I'm gonna go to 34 Hertz here. So this way, I am basically gaining a lot of headroom because I'm cleaning up the low end and everything is nice and tight. So now if I play this, and this is proven by the auto gain. When I hit the auto gain on the 8200, you will see that the sound becomes louder because we actually gained a lot of headroom. So even by doing this very, very simple filter cut, this is going to pay off later on. But make sure that you separate the mid signal and the side signal, having the filter a little bit higher on the side channel, unless you have something that, I mean, if you have an orchestral track and you have the contrabasses on the right, like they are on an orchestral arrangement, then of course you're not gonna do this. But, you know, for a pop track like this, You can do this very easily and you're going to get a nice headroom. Now, let's move on to the second tip that I want to give you. And the second tip is correct first and then enhance. So if your mix has problems, if your mix has areas where it could be improved tonally, or you want to make some cuts and all these things, do those cuts before you start boosting. Most of the times, if I have a situation like this, I'm using 2 or maybe 3 EQs, and each EQ does a different thing. In this case, I'm going to use the 8200 to cut. And this is because I want to make sure that I correct everything before we get to the boosting stage, before I get to the sweetening stage. Because if I don't do this now, then any problematic frequencies are going to add up and they're going to become worse. And this time I'm going to go for some narrower cuts. So let's see. And here's another thing that I do sometimes if I find that, you know, in this case, I want to enhance, let's say, the kick drum or the snare. I'm doing this in this stage because I'm still working on micro frequencies, you know, I'm going very, very deep. So if I want to enhance the kick drum, for example, I'm going to go with a bell actually here, and I'm going to switch this to bell. And just bear in mind, I'm keeping the auto gain on, right? So I'm cutting more than I'm boosting right here. Now I can do the same thing for the side signal. Let's see. So can you hear that? I've mainly done cuts, but can you hear the difference in terms of width, in terms of how much more clear the mix sounds? Pay attention. Not doing anything crazy. This is definitely too much, but I'm trying to show you what you can do in case you have a frequency that really annoys you and you feel it needs to be tamed. This is also the part where you would tame any problems with harshness, and you would use a mastering de-esser or maybe a dynamic EQ. In the case of the 8200, there is a de-esser here that you can activate, and you can tame all those problems with the sibilants or harsh cymbals or stuff like this. In this case, I think it's fine because it's not a very bright mix on purpose. Another thing that I like doing at this stage is that if I find that the mix is already a little bit too boomy or too bright, I like to use the tilt function here in the 8200. There are many EQs that have a tilt function. So this is a great way to kind of balance a mix. And again, if you're interested, go and check the video that I've done on the 8200 because this is a really cool feature. But let me show you what I would do. And I'm still working on the mid-side domain. If you're new to this, I would suggest that you tread carefully and listen, because it's very easy and tempting to go overboard and start adding too much processing on the sides, and then your mix will lose its focus because the mid signal is not going to be strong enough, and you might get imbalances. So just make sure that you turn the EQ on and off and see what's going on. The third tip is enhance with mid-side processing again. So now that I've done all this on my 8200, I'm going to go to the W495 and I'm going to start enhancing things. Because now I know that I'm at a safe place and I know that this is a balanced mix, I can now start enhancing my top end, my mid-range. And I'm going to give you some sub-tips again. Don't boost the low end if you don't have to. If the mix has already enough low end, don't boost it just because it sounds more impressive. I'm going to work on the shelf bands first, and immediately I'm going to turn the low shelf band to mid processing only, because I don't want to boost the low end on the side channel as well. Again, I'm saving headroom here. In this case, for this EQ, maybe I'm going to use 2 instances. See the difference?
And now I stand in front of a railroad. And now I'm trying to show you the way between time and space. Empty
what I'm trying to do right here is with the mid-range, I'm trying to give my master a little bit more perceived loudness. And this is, of course, not in the top end, not in the low end, but in the mid-range. So I'm finding the important elements. In this case, of course, it's the vocals. And let's see. See how you can pinpoint that guitar there? Let's all again. And this is the kind of difference that you should be looking for when you're mastering. It shouldn't sound like a different track. If it sounds like a different track, I would totally suggest that you go back to the mixing stage. Now in this case, because I want to have a little bit more granularity, I'm going to add another instance of the W495, and I'm going to take care of my side sweetening. So I want to bring out those synths, those nice reverb tails, because this is a very kind of dreamy synthwave track. So I'm going to go here and I'm going to turn the mid-range into side, and I'm also going to turn the top end into side mode. see how I can bring up those guitar delays. Now, all these things have to be tasteful, they have to be delicate, they have to be with a purpose, right? So if I really want to bring up those delays, I can do it in the mastering stage, but it has to be because I intend to do it and not because it's a side effect. So to sum up, let's see what we've done here with all these techniques that I showed you. First of all, we took care of the filtering in a separate fashion when it comes to the mid and side signals. Then we first corrected, again in the mid-side domain. And then we started to enhance and add sweetening, mastering EQ with wide curves.
Empty commonplace. I've got a lifetime to begin. My reach is starlight. I've got a lifetime to be seen. Shine like a pulsar. Is it wrong or is it right? Don't know.
So what I've done in this case is I've made the track wider, I've made it more exciting because it was a little bit dull. I made sure that the perceived loudness is bigger now because the mid-range is massaged and we have the vocals coming out a little bit more. And we've made the low end and top end more assertive and more sizzly. So there you go, my friends. I hope you enjoyed these mastering EQ tips. And if you did, I'm going to ask you for a favor. Hit that like button, it really helps. And if you're new here, hit that subscribe button, I'd like to see you back. If you really want to support what I'm doing, you can check out my instruments, the Modern 80s Drum Kit and the Apollo expansion for Pat Shop. You can get one of these non-color changing t-shirts as well, or you can use the super thanks button. I'm going to have links to all the EQs that I showed you here today down below. Happy mastering, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye-bye.